Agatha Christie is the world's best-selling author. She is rightly regarded as the Queen of Crime. But less well known is her work in both world wars and its influence on her writing. Today, we're talking about Agatha Christie at war. Hello, my name is Gareth Edwards and welcome to the Untitled History Podcast. Join me each week alongside world-leading experts as we take a deep dive into your favourite topics from throughout history. From the ancient world to the modern, and with plenty of historical rabbit holes in between, we'll cover famous and not so famous moments in history from all across the globe. Agatha Christie trained as a nurse and served as a Red Cross volunteer in World War I. She later trained to become a dispenser. In the Second World War, she served once again. That work and the experiences, people, and poisons she encountered would prove to be the perfect fuel for her writing career. Here with me to talk about that today is Tina Hodgkinson. Tina, thank you so much for coming on.
Hello, and thank you so much for inviting me.
The person I wanted on to cover this, Agatha at war, I think, is something that really isn't often covered enough in the general public understanding, I think, although obviously Agatha historians know very much about it. And that's what you are. Listeners, if you are unfamiliar with Tina's work, she's a historian and she's the author of Agatha Christie's London, a historical guide to the Queen of Crime's capital, which is an excellent book. There's a copy behind me somewhere on that bookshelf. She is employed at the London Archives, which is the UK's second largest public archive. She's a member of the Crime Writers Association and a qualified City of London and City of Westminster tour guide. So, no one I could think of was better placed to talk about just how critical to Agatha's writing and life experience, her wartime experiences were, than you. So just for listeners, Tina, am I right in that? Is it really critical to understanding Agatha Christie?
Oh, very much so. Although it's something it's not very much talked about, it's been so influential in, I think, both her life, how it impacted on her, the events that happened, but also in her writing. Because what we have with her medical knowledge, because she's working in the hospital, we get her to have this knowledge of poisons, which she will go on and create. Poison was her favourite choice of murder.
And I mean, everyone's got a favourite choice of murder. Listeners, let us know in the comments your favourite method of murder and we will instantly refer you to the Metropolitan Police. But before doing that, I mean, we should set the scene here. What do people need to know about Agatha, who, I mean, at the beginning of the story, isn't even a Christie at this point, going into World War I?
Okay, well, we have Agatha Miller, as she was then. She was born on the 15th of September, 1890, which made her 24 years old when the war started. She was born in Ashfield, her family home in Torquay in Devon. And she was brought up in a very happy middle-class household. They had a very comfortable villa with a beautiful garden. They had servants, but also there was sadness as well because Agatha's father died when she was just 11 years old. So there were some financial difficulties and adjustments that needed to be made. Agatha has got two older siblings, Margaret, who's known as Madge, and Louis, who's known as Monty. And basically, because of the age difference, the gap between them, Agatha's technically brought up as being an only child. She's also mainly homeschooled. So she has a lot of time to wander the gardens, play with her doll's house, and really let her imagination go. And this is where her creativity comes from. Her love of storytelling. Her mum was very much encouraging both her and Madge to write. And Agatha was writing poems and short stories, basically from childhood. And as a result of that, it was later on that Madge dared her, why don't you write a murder mystery?
And what I love about that is that's going to come back into our story because that makes the dedication, doesn't it, in a book we're going to talk about later.
So what we have is, it's basically through a dare that Agatha starts her writing, her crime fiction career. And, at that point, she had no idea. And I think if she looked back today, she'd be actually quite surprised at the success and the popularity that she still holds today. And she's very much dearly loved within the fan base and the ever-expanding fan base, because we have got adaptations, film, theatre, TV, we've got graphic novels, video games, and they're also productions throughout the world. She's very much loved throughout the world. And I think that's what makes it so interesting, is that there's this aspect of her that's sort of been hidden away from the public, hasn't been sort of given the respect that it deserves. And I'm really glad that we're talking about it today.
One thing that always stands out to me about Agatha is, as you've described there, she enters World War I, or that World War I starts at the period where she, like many women of her age, who have gone through similar backgrounds, often middle class, who are educated, who have a little bit of freedom, suddenly find that there is a route into a working life for them that perhaps didn't exist before. And that comes through very much for her in what ends up being a medical career, doesn't it?
Yes. So at the beginning of World War I, Agatha's 24 years old, and she decides that she wants to do her piece for the war effort. So she enrolls with the Red Cross as a volunteer with the Voluntary Aid Detachment. And she decides that she's going to train to be a nurse. So what she needs to do, first of all, is she needs to have some classes. So she does things like learning to bandage. She goes out with members of staff to visit the wards. And she also goes out to do home visits with other members of staff. And on one of those visits, she's involved with someone who has been deceased, and she actually helps to lay out the body. So from very beginning, Agatha is sort of almost thrust from this sort of comfortable middle-class lifestyle. I'm not saying that she's totally sheltered, because I think there's a bit of a misnomer about how young women were in those days. But what I'm saying is that these are experiences that are not general, they're not common, and she's just thrust with it. And I think she takes a very practical and almost pragmatic approach to it. She just gets on with it. And that's one of the things that I find very endearing about her, is that she sort of raises to the challenge and she really embraces the work that she does. So what she starts off with is working in the Torquay Hospital, the Red Cross Hospital. It's been converted from the town hall and it's taking about 200 soldiers. So what you're getting is men that are coming back from the front. They have got injuries or illnesses that can't be treated on the front. They're very serious injuries and they need to be coming back to get proper treatments and support. So it's not sort of very petty or minor things that she's dealing with. She's dealing with very severe end stuff. Now she starts off as basically a ward maid. So the first week or so, she is just delegated to doing housework and cleaning of the hospital. But she's very quickly promoted. And I think they very quickly see the sort of potential with her there. And what they give her is a responsibility along with another nurse. And they are in charge of 24 beds between them, 2 rows of 12 beds. And that is when they're on shift, they are responsible for those 24 soldiers between them.
And as Tina says, listeners, I think the pipeline on this from a military perspective is we sometimes assume and think that if you're wounded on the Western Front, you're treated on the Western Front and then sent back into battle, or you're treated and sent home and you're permanently invalided out. That's absolutely not the case for most of the war. What's actually happening a lot of time is you get this pipeline of people going, actually, is this a short-term injury? Okay, well, we'll treat it in France and then send you back. Is this a long-term injury? In which case, actually, we're going to send you back to the UK. You're going to go to somewhere like Endell Street Hospital in London, or you're going to go to one of these Red Cross hospitals. You will be treated there. You will recover there. Well, you'll hopefully recover there. And then you will be sent back to rejoin a unit or a new unit and go back to France. So the people she is going to be encountering this are going to have a wide range of injuries. This is also, by the way, where if you live in a town that had a lot of this activity going on in World War I, go visit your local churchyard and you will find in that churchyard so many Commonwealth war graves, because they will be the graves of soldiers who didn't survive this return process. So Agatha's going to be encountering a real mix of patients here. She's going to be encountering people who've got very minor injuries. She's also going to be encountering people that have got very serious injuries and also illnesses. And illnesses is a critical thing in here as well, because certainly later in the war, we'll see this a lot. The disease is a problem on the fronts. And the best thing to do if you're trying to treat disease is get people away from the front, because if they're not away from the front, they're going to infect other people. So she really is going to encounter in this environment a wide variety of people, isn't she?
Yes, so Agatha was responsible for the soldiers. And what she is involved with is she's helping out in the operating theatre. She's cleaning up after amputations. She's even removing the severed limbs and taking them to the bin to be disposed of, the furnace to be disposed of. So she's doing all this. There's also quite a severe outbreak, so what's called trench foot. So there's a lot of men that are coming back, and at one point there's about half of all the men that are in the hospital have got this trench foot, which can result through tissue damage into amputation. So at that point, she's doing hours which are 2 to 10 in the evening. So she's working long hours. It's physically very demanding. It's emotionally very difficult. And you've also got to deal with the emotions and mental health of the men that you're caring for. So in terms of trying to be upbeat and kind to them. And I think these are very much the sort of qualities that Agatha displays basically throughout her life. She always seems to have that sort of compassion for people, because you see that she gives an awful lot to charity. And there's a lot of causes that seem to be very dear to her heart. So she's got all this sort of stuff, which is very shocking, but she's very practical and she's very caring, and she's actually very successful with it. She's got a real aptitude to doing this work, and it's really picked up on. Moving on to what happens next to her in terms of her career, she actually has flu, so she's off work for about a month. And when she comes back, the hospital have opened a dispensary. And she's approached to actually work in the dispensary. And she takes up the opportunity. She thinks that their work's going to be interesting, and she thinks the hours are going to be better as well. So in those days, if you were wanting to work in a pharmacy, you had to have a medical qualification. You could not practice, you could not work there without it. So Agatha is needing to work towards a qualification, which was sometimes just called the assistance exam for short. And that would enable her to legally dispense medicine. So while she's sort of in preparation and training for that, she's working in the dispensary, but she's alongside other members of staff who are basically there supervising her. And one of them, her friend Eileen, will actually instruct her in chemistry, because that's part of what she needs to know. And outside of the hospital, she meets and works with a pharmacist who she refers to in her autobiography just as Mr. P. Mr. P, he carries a piece of curare in his pocket because he says it makes him feel really powerful. Now, curare is actually poison, but it's only a poison if it's inserted into the bloodstream. So it's sort of quite safe as he's carrying it around. But it's the thing that will later be used in Agatha's story. And it's also what was used when you're using like poison darts. So it's sort of got that powerfulness, but it's actually, I think it's very much learning what Agatha will learn is that it depends what you do with the quantity and how you sort of minister it determines whether a substance is actually a poison or is actually a medicine which is beneficial to you. And it's a real tightrope at this point, because what we have is medicine is not coming in nice little packages like it is today. You have to make the medicines from scratch. So you need to be able, first of all, she needs to be able to read the prescription. So the prescription's written in Latin. There is also abbreviations, and she needs to know what those are. She needs to get it right. She needs to then be able to identify the quantities, really right down to the last grain. Because without that, if you put too much in and too little, it's not going to be effective and it could possibly be lethal. You also need to know if there's something that sort of is a red flag when you read this prescription. Is there something that the doctor who's prescribing it has maybe not been thinking about correctly? And there's one case when Agatha does that, and what she does is she accidentally knocks over the substance that's been prepared, rather than sort of, because, as her role as a pharmaceutical assistant, you don't say to a doctor, you've got things wrong. So there's that side of it. She has to prepare and create it. So she's making tablets. She's doing mixtures. She's doing powders. She's doing lotions. She needs to know the whole range of things that she needs to prepare. She also needs to write up the labels for people. So when they get their medicine, they know how often to take it and the quantity. And if it's a poison, they also need to have a special label put on the box or the packet to basically say, this is a poison substance. So it's a very responsible job, because if you get it wrong, it can actually be lethal. And this is what Agatha's going to then eventually use to give her stories. What she does next is that she needs to go and actually sit her exams. So the award body for the examinations is actually based in London. It's the Worshipful Company of Apothecaries, who go back to the Middle Ages. They're one of the City of London's livery companies. And they've got a wonderful hall just tucked away behind St. Paul's Cathedral. And it is the oldest surviving livery hall in London, because it was just rebuilt just after the Great Fire of 1666. And what you have is this magnificent building, this wonderful hall with chandeliers and stained glass, and it's very ornate. But this is where she's actually having to sit her exams, and she's got 3 exams to sit. And she has to pass all 3 papers, and she needs to get 50% in each paper. So for chemistry, she gets a whopping 80%. My goodness, I would be so amazed if I got that.
Yeah, I'm not getting 80% on a chemistry exam. My wife is, I'm not.
She's absolutely fantastic. She gets 65% for Metateria Medica, which is sort of like the compounds and how you sort of put things together. Brilliant again. Practical pharmacy, she gets 40%. So she's failed practical pharmacy. What does Agatha do? She comes back to the Apothecaries Hall in April that year, and she resits her exam. And this time she gets 55%. She passes her exam, and she's legally able to dispense medicines.
And what I like about this is it really highlights that this isn't just a thing she's doing on a whim. Like, you don't go and resit that exam unless you absolutely genuinely want that qualification. And when she resits that, as you say, that's April 1917. We're into the war here. She's having all these experiences. She's continuing down this career path. Obviously, she's not officially a published author yet, but she's already started to take some of this knowledge and the original dare almost, and start to work out how she would write around this subject, hasn't she?
Yeah, so what she finds with the working in the pharmacy is that there's quiet periods. There's a bit of a lull sometimes. And I think it's a little bit boring as well at times for her. So she thinks, you know what, this is the perfect time for me to actually write. I can do it in my free time when it's a little bit quieter. And she's surrounded by poisons. So what does she do? She starts writing The Mysterious Affair at Stars. It's her very first novel. It won't get published until 1920, but she's writing it in the middle of the First World War. And Agatha is always a contemporary author. It's one of my little hobby horses. I know a lot of her stuff is set in the 1920s and 1930s, and it's beautifully done on the adaptations. But Agatha writes between the 1910s to the 1970s, and her work was always contemporary.
And I think that's where we should dig into next, because we're almost moving beyond the direct World War I experience now, but into how that experience is now shaping what she's doing. And if listeners, if your little grey cells are running here and you're trying to work out what that book is, and the first detective it launches from Agatha's ultimately quite large stable of detectives, it is, of course, Hercule Poirot and his ever glorious assistant, at the time, I think in the book, Lieutenant Hastings rather than Captain, isn't he, at this point? But those two things again, as well, as you say, Tina, Agatha is always a contemporary author. And that's, I think, partly why some of her works resonate so well, whether they're short stories, long form, at the time, is because she's writing about experiences people know. So when she's writing about Hercule, of course, is a Belgian refugee. These are people she will have encountered on the streets. Over 250,000 Belgian refugees are in the UK at this time. It's the largest displaced population of refugees the UK ever has to deal with in a single go, because Belgium's mostly been occupied by the Germans. So she's encountering people like Hercule on the street. She's writing those things into her stories. Other people across the country will have encountered people. When she says, right, well, this is a Belgian detective who's a refugee and he's in a country house and he meets a lieutenant in the army who is recovering from injuries sustained on the Western Front. Listeners, everything you have heard in the first half of this podcast, you can see where she's drawing those experiences from. And that, to me, is fascinating. I think we think of her now almost as a writing about past, but she's not. She's writing about what's real for her at the time.
Very much so. And what we have her making Poirot a Belgian refugee. And it's because there is some Belgian refugees who arrive in Torquay. There has been research that's been done, and basically they found out that Agatha, who was actually training, she took lessons in piano, she wrote compositions, she actually performs for these Belgian refugees in Torquay. There's a bit of research, and we can't obviously ask Agatha for definite, but there is one Belgian refugee in particular. His name is Jacques Borans. I'm probably not pronouncing the name properly. Forgive me.
It's a podcast tradition, is me absolutely brutally murdering French and Belgian pronunciations. So don't worry, you're in good company on that one.
Okay, so he was actually a Belgian policeman. There's the belief that he might be the person that she based Poirot on. Now, we can't go back and we can't ask Agatha. She didn't refer to this in her autobiography, but the research has been done and we can place Agatha with this gentleman in Torquay at the time. And I think if it wasn't him, it certainly gave her some ideas with it.
I mean, that's the thing, is that you, as an author, we're both authors, we're both published authors, you write what you know. Like, at least certainly early in your career, when you're building your confidence, you draw on your personal experiences, you draw on your family experiences. Particularly, listeners, remember, and this makes me feel old, we're in an era here then, well before the birth of the internet. If you want to know, how do I poison one? Well, you shouldn't be Googling that anyway. But trust me, you don't want to Google that. Unless, again, you like a visit from the Inspector Japs of this world. But as an author back then, you're either going to have to make this stuff up, you're going to have to try and find out in the library, unless you happen to have served as a dispenser and an active nurse in World War I, and then you are going to know a lot of this stuff based on the exams you have passed at honourable company premises. So it genuinely does amaze me that people don't realise how much she's writing from a position of knowledge. She's not just sat in a country cottage making this stuff up. This is actual knowledge she has. It's lived experience that she has. And that comes through again and again and again in all of her different books and adventures, doesn't it?
Oh, very much so. Could I just add a little bit about Poirot in the first Mysterious Fair Styles, if I may?
Yeah,
So
go for it.
he's actually living in Styles St Mary, so it's a fictitious village, which is in Essex. He's actually living with other Belgian refugees, which is very typical of Belgian refugees who didn't have the financial means to pay for for their own properties with it. And what I find interesting about it is that as the war progresses, if first of all, we're all very keen on the Belgians, the lucky Belgians, Britain enters the First World War because Belgium is invaded. And there's all this sort of fondness for these Belgian refugees. We also have in October 1950, Nurse Edith Cavell. Now, she's a British nurse. She's working in a Red Cross hospital. So very parallel with Agatha. She's also working in a Red Cross hospital. But she is also helping the Allied soldiers flee from occupied Belgium. It's brought to the authorities' attention, and she's executed by firing squad in October 1915. This at the time in Britain, we still had voluntary subscription, and it actually boosts the number of men who are actually going forward to, fight in the war. We move on a little bit longer, and the war's carrying on, and we've got casualty rates, we've got food prices being increased, and the public attitude to these plucky, wonderful Belgian refugees is beginning to change. We have it by the year after the war's finished. So by 1919, we actually have 90% of Belgian refugees have actually returned back to Belgium. So what we have here with Poirot, he is the 10%, the 1 in 10 of Belgian refugees who remain here. Now, we know from reading the stories, it isn't like he's met someone and he's got married or he's in a relationship. So it isn't like he's staying for personal reasons. But there is some other reason that he's decided to stay, and that's because of the success of his first book. The success of his first crime solving, which happens in the first book, The Mysterious Fair Styles. So what we have is Poirot then relocating to London with Hastings, and then we have a very similar Holmes and Watson setup, because Agatha really admired Conan Doyle. And what she's doing originally when she's starting out, she's sort of emulating the sort of character setup, particularly in the short stories that she's writing for the Sketch magazine, which is what will happen from the publication Mysterious Affairs Styles in 1920. So we have this sort of setup with it. It's interesting that Poirot stays behind and he wants to solve crimes in the UK. What I love is that, although the interest or the commitment towards the Belgian refugees changes in public perceptions, Agatha actually stays very loyal to Poirot. There are times we read about later that she might be irritated with him or whatever, but you know what? She doesn't change it. She doesn't try and change his character. She doesn't try and change his background, although we know very little about him. He is always a refugee. So he's always an outsider. And that is one of his strengths, because he can go to places, he can go to these country homes, and what he can do is that he can perceive things that maybe other people wouldn't. He picks upon how the English behave.
You can also spend a lot of time being mistaken for being French, which actually is quite useful. And I like that because, again, it's like, as we've talked about here, there is a reason he is Belgian. And you see it sometimes in discussion when there's like Kenneth Branagh's recent version of Poirot or whatever, it always comes back as like history's most famous Belgian is Poirot. And then you get a whole raft of people going, oh, it's so random that he's Belgian. It's like, it's absolutely not random that Poirot is Belgian. It's entirely the result of Agatha's experiences, her encounters, and as you say, that it's contemporary. it is a thing that will resonate with people because they will have encountered these people both in a positive sense and increasingly, as you say, as the war comes to an end, almost in a, well, why haven't they gone home yet sense. And that gives her so much flexibility in writing. And it's why Poirot remains my personal favourite character of hers. I've actually, listeners, if you're in the UK, I'm delighted to tell you if you haven't spotted it, but all of the David Suchet Poirots are all up on ITVX. You can just go online and watch them all. And some of those are better than others. Suchet is always amazing. He will always be my Poirot to me, even though he doesn't always capture the underlying character, but he does make it in his own. But that's why he's Belgian. That's why Poirot is Belgian. It's contemporary. It's Agatha tapping in to the zeitgeist, to the market. She is a very smart writer, and she knows exactly how to make this stuff work. So obviously, there's other areas we can talk about. Now, you could do an entire list of World War I references in Agatha Christie works. Like, they're just, characters are constantly either people who have fought on the front, they are people who are related to a brother that died of the front. All those things are effectively grounding her work in a world that the readers will understand. But it's not just World War I that plays a role in that, is it? Because she is active in World War II as well.
Yes, she is. So what we have in the interwar years is Agatha is obviously devoting herself to her writing. What we see in that period, it's known as the Golden Age of detection fiction. So we're looking from 1918 to 1945, roughly. You've basically got a particular style where you're looking at a whodunit. There's a puzzle element. There's nothing really graphic that's been written. But as we're getting nearer towards the onset of the Second World War, things become much more foreboding and her work becomes much more psychological. And you see that very much so in And Then There Were None, that was published in 1939, which is the world's best-selling crime fiction book of all time. We have the onset of World War II, and what we have is Agatha is now married to Max Mallowan. He's an archaeologist. Her second husband and her are at Greenway, which is their home in Devon when we have the outbreak of World War II. But her home is going to be requisitioned for the United States Navy. So Agatha and her husband, they go up to London. Max is doing some war work. He's got his languages through his archaeology. It's a very important skill. And Agatha's home is actually bombed. Thankfully, Agatha is away for the weekend, so no one's hurt. But what she writes in her autobiography is that the ground floor and the roof and the upper floor is damaged, and the sort of middle part of the house is fine. It means that they're no longer able to live there. We have, from looking at the London County Council Fire Brigade Air Raid books, which we've got at the London Archives where I work, and which shout out to Andrew Lott for being such a hero for actually cataloguing that collection for us. I found out that Agatha's home was bombed. Her street was bombed on the 8th and the 28th of September, 1940. So it's just basically at the beginning of the period that we know the Blitz, the intensive bombing over London, which takes place from the September 1940 to the May 1941. So she's living through the Blitz. What she will do by 1941 is settle in Lawn Road Flats, which today is better known as the Isocon building, a very modernistic building. It's got flats, but it's also got the Isocon bar, a communal restaurant for residents and also open to the public. So she's going to be there. So what we have while she's there, Max goes away and he's working overseas, doing his bit for the war effort. And Agatha decides to go back to become a voluntary dispenser again. So she is this time working for civilians, and she's based at University College Hospital in London, so very close to Euston Station. And she's there from 1941 to 1945. And she's based in a building which is called the Cruciform Building because it's shaped like a cross. The design has been basically the idea that you'll be able to have a very small area of land, but actually be able to build all these wards. And it, because of the cross shape, that it's got good ventilation as well with it. And it's designed by Alfred Waterhouse, who most people will be better known with the Natural History Museum in South Kensington.
I mean, they're both glorious buildings. It's like, listeners, if you've never had a wander around, I mean, this is your classic London thing, where you've got layers and layers and layers of history. You've got these beautiful buildings designed by incredible people, but also then you've got, like we're talking about here, you've got people like Agatha Christie moving through these buildings, building up their experiences, working all the way through the war. As you say, I think she stays at University College Hospital, just in a role there until till the end of the war in Europe, isn't it? It's about 1945.
She's there till 1945, and she's working 2 full days, 3 half days on alternate Saturday mornings. Plus, because she's actually living quite close to the hospital compared to how a lot of other medical staff would be, she's also covering staff that aren't able to get into the hospital for whatever reason. She decides that she needs to update her medical knowledge. So this again gives her a bit of more impetus for the poisons that she's going to write about. And there's a hospital magazine article where she says she felt it was a little strange going back to the job that she used to do 25 years ago. And what she wrote about also was how she uses her poisons. And she said, it's quite complicated. You really have to consider about the type of medication that you're going to use, how accessible it would have been for the murderer to get to it. And she also revealed about when she was writing about the poisons, she basically downplayed them a bit. So there's nothing really graphic, so there's no vomiting or purging or other disgusting details. She sort of leaves those out. But her descriptions are very, very accurate. And that reminds me, I should have said it before, but when we were talking about the mysterious Furs Styles, one of her most favourite reviews that she ever got was from the Pharmaceutical Journal, because they basically applauded her for how accurate her use of her description of strychnine had been in her book.
But I like about this, I mean, in this, the World War II era for her, is like, she's not an unknown character at this point. Like you say, she's had an incredibly successful interwar period, like really exploded as a writer. We're also starting to get into the period where some of her work's being adapted for stage. So like, she's a public figure. And I've always wondered what it must have been like if you're like working in UCH at that time. And like you've suddenly got this, this volunteer nurse, this volunteer dispenser, and working along. You wander along to get your dispensary stuff sorted, and you look up, and the person standing behind the counter issuing your medicine is Agatha Christie, and you're like, I'm not sure whether to be excited about this or scared.
I know it's sort of very juxtaposition with it, isn't it? Also, while the war's going on, we also need to really give her credit for her writing output. It's phenomenal. She has 13 crime fiction novels published during the Second World War. She is really busy. Max is away. She's missing Max. She's doing her contribution to the war work, but she wants to keep busy. And I think it's that sort of very much that focus with it. We also have her doing 2 extra books, so actually 15 books she writes, because she writes Sleeping Murder and she also writes Curtain, which she sort of puts there and gives to her daughter and her husband, 1 each, in case all of a sudden something happens to you in the war and she's in a position where, she isn't able to write. So they've got like a little, I was going to say a little nest egg, but, the money won't such drop off totally. So she thinks about that. She also, which we haven't talked about, she also writes under a pseudonym called Mary Westmacott. And she's written 6 novels, which are sort of like psychological dramas. They've often been very dismissed as sort of like women's fiction in the past. They are very deep. And I think if you really want to know the sort of part of how Agatha ticks, you really get a different insight. They're not crime fiction. She didn't tell anyone what the name was, that she was writing these, and the name leaked out. But anyway, during the Second World War, she writes what she's been sort of yearning to do, which is Absence in the Spring, and she literally writes it in 2 or 3 days flat. She phones up the hospital and says, "I'm really sorry, I can't come in." And when she comes back, she's looking exhausted and frazzled, and they think she must have been seriously ill. But what she has been doing is she's just been wanting to get this novel out and finished because it's been with her for a long time. She also writes Come Tell Me How You Live, which is about her experiences with Max and the archaeological dig. So another part of her work, Agatha went along, she did a course on photography, so she was photographing the items that were excavated. She was also cleaning them up. She'd use her face cream to actually clean the ivories because it needed to be very delicately done. And she's basically talking about that in her book. So if you're wanting another dimension of another aspect of this amazing woman, she has so many strings to her bows. I'd certainly recommend that book. She's also has 2 plays in the West End during this time. She has And Then There Were None, which is at the St James Theatre. The theatre gets bombed. They move it to the Cambridge Theatre, and then they move it back to St James's. And then towards the end of the war in 1945, she's adapted her other novel, Appointment with Death, on stage. And just to say about And Then There Were None, the book is very dark. The novel is very dark, if people know it. And personally, my favourite of all Agatha's. I absolutely adore it. But what she does is she realises during the Second World War, for the audiences, they need a bit of a lift. You know, they're in the middle of wartime. London is being bombed. People who they love are being killed. So she actually changes the ending. So it isn't like she's just it's when she does her work, when she does her stage work, it isn't like as a playwright, she just says whatever with it. We've got The Hollow she writes, which is touring later this year, and Poirot's in the novel, but he's not in the stage play. So she plays around with things. And she really loved writing for the stage. Not only is The Mousetrap, which comes out in 1952, going to be the world's longest running play, which is still on today in the West End, but she is also the first woman writer to have 3 plays simultaneously on in London's West End, with The Mousetrap, Witness for the Prosecution, and Spider's Web. So she's doing all this. She's just cramming things in. And you know what? She goes to bed with her 2 favourite possessions next to her fur coat and her hot water bottle. And she covers her face in case there's bombing during the night. And in the daytime, she gets up and she's just phenomenal.
I think, I mean, you talked there about we're almost in 1952 now. We're moving beyond the war. But again, what we see here is we see exactly the same thing we saw after World War One. So we see that, again, she's making these things contemporary. This is about keeping things contemporary in the same way as in the interwar period. In so many of her books, we see references to men and women and their experience in World War One. Post World War Two, we see the same thing again. Now, I always look at things like, Murder on the Orient Express, is a classic one for World War One stuff, where you've got one of the eventual murderers, spoilers, but the reason he's connected to the person who is murdered is because of his service in World War One with the victim's father. We see in stuff like Marple, post-war, we see references to characters or family members who died at Dunkirk. She's using those references again. She's using what's familiar with people. And listeners, we're not going to have time to dive into this on the main part of the show. And we'll talk on it briefly now, but we're going to have to save this bit for the extra bit, Tita. So if you want to know the really juicy bit that we're about to talk to, you are going to want to listen to the extra bit. But I also love that she has a very brief encounter with MI5 during World War II, doesn't she?
She does. Are we talking about this now or in the juicy bit?
Well, listeners, you're going to get most of it in the juicy bit. Maybe we'll finish this episode by teeing this up. I'll tee this up, which is being such a prolific writer as Tina's described in World War II, and because she knows people, she talks to people, she does everything else. One of the people that she is actually becomes good friends with in the interwar period, is a chap named Dilly Knox. Now, if you are a military historian, that is a name that will instantly ring bells with you. If you are not, I mean, I can't believe anyone's listening to this who isn't a military historian. Aren't we all? Dilly is, in World War I, Dilly is actually the head of Room 40 at the Admiralty, which is the Admiralty's secret department that decodes German codes. Dilly Knox, in fact, is one of the people who is responsible for decoding the telegram that the Germans send the Mexicans, saying that if the Mexico invades US, then Germany will back them. It's one of the things that brings the US into the war, into World War I. So he is very closely connected to the world of espionage and mystery. He is also a good friend of Agatha Christie's. I can't remember specifically which story it is that a character in World War II pops up in, but it's the well-named Major Bletchley pops up in one of her works in World War II, by which point Dilly Knox is now head of department at a certain country house that is also working on codes. And this leads to her having an interesting encounter with MI5 as a result. But we'll dig into that a bit in the extra bit. Sorry, listeners, because we've kind of run out of time on it here. But I like it because it's another example of, whether officially or not, she is writing in worlds and she is encountering worlds that she then is working out how she's putting into her books. But for the remainder of the main part of the episode, Tina, let's almost sum it up for listeners. Do you feel that Agatha's experiences in both World War I and World War II, that you kind of have to understand them to understand her output?
I think it's helpful. I think you can read the book stories and just enjoy them. They are entertaining. She knows that's what she's writing is for entertaining. I think if you want to sort of scratch the surface and get a more sort of in-depth look at things, then I'd certainly say that it's really helpful for you to know that information, because then you look at it and you can actually see what the influences were, what her own experiences were. And I just want to say, regarding the First World War, I saw her VAD card when I went to the Red Cross archives, and she had done a staggering 3,400 hours of voluntary work during the First World War. And I said to them, I said, oh, is that sort of typical? You know, I had no idea what the average was. So they said, oh, there was a whole stack of cards. Have a look at a few of them. So I took them at random, and it could be just what I took was whatever. But most people had done under 100 or just over 100 hours.
I think that's the perfect thing to leave listeners on, I think. Just like you say, this wasn't a pastime to her. This was a thing that she was very dedicated to, that she put as much effort into as she did into her writing. And it's not a dalliance. This is a thing that she took very seriously and really fed in to her life. Well, look, Tina, thank you very much for joining me for this episode. We'll talk in a bit about Agatha not getting arrested by MI5, just about. So hang around for that extra bit, listeners. But where can people find out more about your work and writing? I mean, in a weird way, actually, we've kind of touched on it a bit already, because we've described several places in London here that Agatha was involved in, where she worked at, and that are worth seeing. And one reason I wanted you on is precisely because of the book you've written that covers those kind of areas. So do you want to give that shout out to that book again and tell people what they can expect within it?
Oh, thank you. That's really kind. So my book is called Agatha Christie. It's London, A Historic Guide to the Queen of Crime's Capital. It was published by History Press in February this year, and it's available currently at hardback. I don't know when the paperback's coming out. Basically, the book's in 3 parts, so there's 3 sections. And it's designed for people to either read it straight through or you can dip into it. So the first section is about Agatha Christie and her personal connections with London. So we talk about the fact that she used to go and visit Auntie Granny in Ealing, and Auntie Granny is one of the influences from Miss Marple, a character. We talk about what we've talked about with her medical work, because she sat her exams in London. and she works here during the Second World War. The plethora of houses she has like her own little property empire, and they're very, from very cute, bijou, muse houses to sort of very sort of grand, houses. She has a sort of whole plethora of things that she lives in. And also we talk about the Detection Club, which is the very elite group by invitation only membership for crime writers, invitation only. And Agatha was one of the first people to join. Plus, she then went on to become its president, and it's an organisation that's still run today. Martin Edwards is the current president. So that's the first part. The second part we're looking, and it's split into Poirot, Marple, Tommy and Tuppence, standalones, plays, other stories, and Mary Westmacott. And we're looking at where London features in all of those. And also I do a bit of an overview in terms of what places in London were featured and sort of how she depicts London through the decades. And then the final part is we've got a walk, the ultimate Agatha Christie walk, and it's basically taking you through the West End. So you're starting going through Mayfair and St James, the very posh parts, and you're going through Chinatown and Soho and into Theatreland. And it basically, you'll see one of the houses Agatha lived in. You'll see the hotel where Bertram's Hotel is meant to be based on. You'll see the theatres that her plays are performed in. And you'll see her wonderful memorial, which is gorgeous, absolutely beautiful. And I give you a detailed description of what the symbolism is on that as well with it. So that's basically the book. And it's very much something that I love doing because as a tour guide, I created these tours and I really just wanted to just nerd out on Agatha Christie. And I was so pleased that the book's been published. So thank you for letting me do a little shout out for it.
Oh, no, I've got a good friend of mine who's also got a copy and is a massive Christie nerd. And he is absolutely pestering me as to when we are both going to do the walk in the book together because he's very keen to do it. So I think we're going to wait for the UK, of course, listeners, if you're not here, is in the middle of a heat wave at the moment. I think we've decided we're going to wait for the heat wave to be over before we attempt to traipse through London following in the footsteps of Agatha Christie. But it is on our list of things to do. Well, look, thanks again for joining me and stick around because we're about to talk MI5, Agatha and more. But listeners, that's the end of the main show. Thanks as always for listening. Don't forget that you can get the extra bits by going to untitled-history.com, becoming a member. It gives you access to all of the extra discussions we have about all these podcasts, but also the random videos I share, little bits of extra history, outtakes from episodes, and we've got merch on there as well. But also, if you really enjoyed this show, spread the word. We are a general purpose history podcast, and that is brilliant. It means we can bring you lots and lots of different interesting topics and not just retread the kind of topics that you see on YouTube or elsewhere over and over and over again. The downside of that is it does mean it's far harder for us to get into the recommended list for people naturally on platforms like Spotify and YouTube. So we are incredibly reliant and grateful of word of mouth. If you know someone who would love this episode, if you know someone who would love a previous episode, ping them a link on WhatsApp. Comment on an episode. That helps YouTube know that we should put this episode into people's feeds. Talk about it over the water cooler at work. Mention it when you're dispensing poisons to people at University College Hospital. Whatever format your outreach takes, it is good for us as long as you're not murdering that person. Don't tell people you're about to murder about the podcast. I do not want a visit from Poirot. But thank you very much for listening. We'll be back next week with more content for you. But in the meantime, Tina and I are going to talk more about Agatha Christie, what we missed and didn't have a time to talk about in the main episode, and her encounter with Bletchley Park.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Untitled History Podcast, a Battle Guide production. If you've enjoyed this episode and would like to support the podcast, why not head over to our dedicated supporter page? There, for the cost of a cup of tea, you can decide which subjects we cover next, get access to exclusive behind-the-scenes content, and join a community of like-minded people. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.